As we roll on, Eagles running back Saquon Barkely and his legendary reverse hurdle are the cover of Madden NFL 26. Everything is coming up Saquon right now, including in Philadelphia. The iconic Geno's Steaks in South Philly is lending its facade to the honor. They are now selling Steakwans for the moment and are actually delicious no matter what you call them, but one way or the other. They now have Steakwans there after Saquon Barkely had what I think one could argue was as good a season as any NFL team has ever had, or any NFL running back has ever had. He won the rushing title during the year, 2,005 rushing yards, opted against going for the all-time single-season record, which he could have done. He then joined Emmitt Smith and Terrell Davis as the only players ever to lead the league in rushing and then win the Super Bowl. He won the rushing title, the Offensive Player of the Year, and the Super Bowl. Terrell Davis, the only player before him to win all three in the same season since 1972, which is when Offensive Player of the Year was first awarded. And then Barkley had 11 games with 100 rushing yards last year, the most by any player in their first season with a team in NFL history. And so as I sit here, start going over football notes, Dominique Foxworth, I don't know that everyone knows this about you, but you are an analytics geek. You are like that kind of analytics-driven nerd. And so it brings me to the question. Listen to Hembo laughing back there as the shoe fits. It brings me to the question. Is last year, did we see the beginning of a renaissance at running back? Was that a blip or was that the beginning of a trend?
Well, I resent you calling me an analytics nerd. I'm not a nerd. I'm a tough guy, like my favorite Jeff Saturday. And I think what we're seeing is not the resurgence of the running back as much as we're seeing the resurgence of the running game. As defensive lines get smaller and linebackers get smaller in order to rush the passer, it feels like the Eagles are a perfect example of the O-line is getting bigger. They have tackles at guard. They're enormous, and they use that advantage to run the ball. So because of some of the things in the salary cap and generally the amount of running backs that you can find, I'm not sure that we're going to see a resurgence or a newfound respect for the running back itself. But I do think, to your point, analytics is about finding advantages. And right now, there seems to be an advantage in getting big and getting physical in the modern NFL.
So let's make sure that we're clear on what we're saying here, Tim Hasselbeck. What he's saying is that defenses, in order to try and contain all these high-octane passing games, have gotten smaller. And so the offenses have swung the pendulum in the other direction and gotten bigger.
I think it's accurate. Look, if you just look at starting defenses, a lot of people, when they put it their starting defense, there's a third corner. I mean, they're essentially in nickel defense, as their, primary defense. So, the days of, a standard 4-3 with, big, run stuffing linebackers, those days are long gone. And in fact, it really probably, you go back to like Pete Carroll at USC, facing Oregon, where you had these like hybrid safety linebackers, that all of a sudden became kind of like this, big nickel. And so a lot of people are playing like that. Well, like, getting into, run looks and running the football, as Neek said, with like now all of a sudden, like investing in guards, investing, not just at the tackle position to be able to run the football. And then you pair that, then let's be fair too to Saquon, pair that with an elite runner. There's not, a Saquon Barkley on every team. You do that, now all of a sudden, it is different. So, I think that's 100% happening, and that's why I know we're planning on going this direction. That's why I think what Jim Harbaugh is trying to do with the Chargers, I think is on the mark. Just, a little side note there.
Meaning he's putting together, he's building his team around an offensive line. They drafted a running back. He's looking to run the heck out of it.
Yeah, 290-pound fullback. He's got like his plan is to basically beat you with a sledgehammer. I mean, that's his plan.
Well, Jeff Darlington, I mean, you're out there covering these games every single week, and you're talking to all the people who put them together. It did occur to me at some point last season, there is no better play than the explosive run. There's not, if every offense could have that in their arsenal, that's what they would choose to do over everything, because it has absolutely no risk or close to no risk, where on a passing play, so many different things could go wrong.
Well, statistically across the league, we did see, although very slim, we saw more running last year than previous years. That being said, passing is still the one thing that is going for more yards, and it's happening more often. Yes, there's more balance, but it still is a passing league. And you go back to the idea of value. It was a big story last year. Remember when we talked about the running back market and when Saquon was leaving New York in the first place, the idea that teams did not want to pay running backs. I actually think, yes, the pendulum swings a little bit, but Saquon getting this big deal from the Eagles actually could make it even more complicated for running backs, because I still don't think teams are going to pay most running backs. I think it is very much a class system where we have Saquon, we have Derrick Henry, maybe Josh. There's some guys, maybe Bijan Robinson, but I really don't think that we're all of a sudden going to see this influx of money when general managers that I've talked to would still rather draft a guy, and I know this sounds mean, but run him into the ground and draft another guy after that. I think the idea that Saquon will that all high tide raises all boats, I don't think that pertains to the running back market. Saquon is an anomaly and an outlier.
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, and Saquon himself still isn't getting paid as much as you would expect for the impact that he's having. Like the position itself,
right.
The value isn't changed. And to Jeff's point, there were 25 running backs in the draft this year. That suggests that we respect the running game, but it doesn't necessarily suggest that we respect the running back, because we'll see how many of those guys get big money extensions when the time comes.
Tim, I got 15 seconds. Finish it.
Yeah, the delta between the top, Saquon and the next guys is greater than it is for running backs, 5 through 25.
Yeah. So it's just going to be the guys at the very top. I'm telling you, just watch for these rookie runners, Ashton Genty obviously being at the top of the list, to smash their way into the league and make a huge impact immediately. Our next game is called Buy or Sell. Hey, Dominique Foxworth, Caleb Williams and the Bears making the playoffs. You buying or selling?
Yeah, I'm buying. I know the division is very tough, but Caleb is immensely talented, and they've added a coach and an offensive line that can do some of the things that we've talked about earlier in this show. Run the ball. Running the ball takes pressure off of everyone on your team, your offense and your defense and your quarterback. And if they can effectively do that the way that the Lions did, I think that Caleb, who's an extremely talented quarterback, will have a really good season, and his team could sneak into the playoffs.
Also drafted a good pass-catching tight end in round one. Jeff, if I were to say the Steelers are going to finish last in the AFC North, buy or sell?
I am selling because of two reasons. The first of which is I think that Aaron Rodgers will inevitably sign with the Steelers at some point, and it will improve the quarterback situation. I am also pointing out that we have another team in that division, unless there is a division realignment in the next several months where the Browns are no longer in the AFC North. I believe that the Steelers will avoid the cellar because, quite frankly, they'll have a better quarterback than the Browns and a better roster.
All right, well, you mentioned the Browns, so let's go to them. Tim Hasselbeck, if I said Shedeur Sanders is going to start the season as the starting quarterback in Cleveland, are you buying or selling?
I'm selling that. I mean, the reality is that quarterback room is super crowded. We've been talking about that, since the draft. And the guys that are in that quarterback room are qualified to win the job. Joe Flacco's a Super Bowl winning quarterback. Kenny Pickett's a former first rounder that started games last year for the Super Bowl winning Eagles. So look, I just think that reps sound like they're going to be fairly even. And I believe that the guys that have the experience, like Flacco and Pickett have the upper hand in a competition if that's how it's going to go in Cleveland.
All right, I'm going to bookmark the starting week one piece of this in a minute. For those of you who haven't heard it, I wanted you to hear what Deion Sanders said. That's obviously Shedeur's father. He was on the Say What Needs to Be Said podcast with Asante Samuel. By now, you've probably all heard about all these reports that Shedeur Sanders wasn't prepared for meetings ahead of the NFL draft and whatever it was in his behavior that caused him to fall to the fifth round. Here's what Deion said about all of that.
When you sit up there and say something like he went in a meeting unprepared, like, dude, Shedeur Sanders, who's had 6 different coordinators, who has still functioned and leveled up every time we brought somebody new in, and you're gonna tell me
every situation.
You're gonna tell me he had on headphones. Shedeur, anybody know my son, understand he's a professional. Like, he's gonna go into a meeting with headphones on. Like, y'all come on, man.
So the fall, for lack of a better word, because it was more than a slide. I mean, it was a plummeting of Shedeur Sanders in the draft remains one of the most surprising things that I've seen happen in sports in all my time at ESPN. And Jeff Darlington, I guess I would ask you, as you hear Deion saying what he's saying there, what is your reaction?
Well, I certainly don't think I'm not interested in debating whether Deion's right about in terms of Shedeur and whether he had the right attitude in meetings. I think that, quite frankly, something happened. I don't know what it was. Maybe it's simply physical, where teams evaluated him not necessarily as a franchise quarterback right now. Maybe they didn't feel like he had the right attitude in meetings. Whatever the case may be, we know that Shedeur Sanders now is going into a situation where it will be more difficult. It will be more difficult because he's going into a quarterback room that is very crowded, one that will require distribution of reps to a number of different players. Normally speaking, when you're a top-end prospect as a rookie, you're going to get those reps early on, and you're going to be conditioned to become that week one starter. For Shedeur, this is going to be an uphill climb. So, to Deion's point, I don't know what happened or why necessarily he ended up where he did in the draft, but I do know as a result of it, it is going to be a more difficult prospect for him.
Okay, that's indisputable. But Tim Hasselbeck, let me make a case to you as one, you know, obviously having been a quarterback yourself, how the dynamics of all of this work. There are a lot of different ways this could have turned out for Shedeur once he fell out of, let's just say, the third round. One of them is a team that has Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts on it could have said, you know what, he's a good value at this point, let's just take him. At that point, he has no chance to play. Instead, he got taken by Cleveland, which is a team that we thought needed a quarterback going in, and you just ran through the list of names that are otherwise in that room. Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, Dylan Gabriel, with no disrespect to any of them. It's not like any team in the NFL is saying, boy, I really envy them having those options at their disposal. So my counterpoint to what everyone else is saying, Tim, is this. If Shedeur Sanders if everything else was the same, but he had been drafted in the second round where we expected him to be, and all the other people were still there, we'd be expecting him to win this job. And maybe not week one, maybe they give that to one of the veterans, but eventually to become the quarterback. And I still believe that the path to that exists because nothing about him changed besides the number next to his name in the draft. Tim, what are your thoughts?
Greeny, to your point, you're exactly right. Going to a spot that does not have an entrenched starter is a benefit to any quarterback because at least there's opportunity. If you go and if you go to Buffalo, you're just there to be Josh Allen's backup. If you go somewhere else that doesn't have an entrenched starter, you have a chance. That's the glimmer of hope. And to your point, if you're a second-round pick that goes to a place that doesn't have an entrenched starter, then you presumably become the starter at some point. Look at the Tennessee Titans and Will Levis. That's exactly what happened. Like, that's just, they didn't have an entrenched starter. He was the second-round pick, if I'm remembering correctly, and guess what happens? He becomes the starter. That is what happens. Now, I would say this. There's a big difference between a first and second round pick. Well, first off, there's a big difference between a first round pick and everything else. Then there's a big difference between being a second round pick and a sixth round pick. When you're a high draft pick, look, oftentimes you're just anointed the spot. And that is for every position, quite frankly. Like, if you're a second-round corner, I got news for you. The street free agent's not going to get as many reps as the second-round corner is going to get. You're anointed that spot. And so that's not going to happen with Shedeur. It just happens. That's the way the NFL works, based on where you're drafted, and it's hard to overcome it.
I get it. But, Neek, hear me out on this. If he's as good as every evaluator that I heard from said, I'm not an evaluator, I can't tell you how good he is or isn't, but I didn't hear anyone saying he's a fifth-round talent. If he is as good as all the people were suggesting he was going into the draft, second round at worst, bottom of the second round at worst, then when he gets his chance to prove that, I believe he will. And the fact that he was a fifth-round pick could become irrelevant pretty quickly. What am I missing?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that we like to believe that professional sports is a meritocracy, and maybe it's the closest we have to meritocracy in a society, but it does matter. There is some privilege to being a high drafted player, and we find excuses and reasons like the O-line wasn't good enough, the coordinators weren't good enough, we didn't give you enough weapons. When you have the talent and the expectation of being a high draft pick, when you are not, no matter whether the O-line is good or the running game is good or your defense gives you support, if you do not succeed, you are out. They're looking for the next player. So, like, it stinks. I understand that Shedeur's in a situation where he can probably play himself into being a long-term starter, but he's not going to get the leash. He's not going to get a second year. He's not going to get all the opportunities that we would give to a first-round quarterback. So that's as honest as I can be about the way that it works in the NFL. It's unfortunate. Had he been higher drafted, there will be somebody in that building who sincerely believed in him, someone with some power that would not let them turn the page on him immediately. So first he has to get on the field. Then he has to play well with not great collection of talent around him.
Jeff.
Tom Brady will forever be the perfect example for Shedeur Sanders. And I know that feels like hyperbole because he's the greatest of all time. But in his rookie year, he had to ascend from a deep, deep backup up to an eventual backup behind Drew Bledsoe going into that second year. And then he had to rely on the fate of an injury to actually get his opportunity. It requires so many different things to go right for a person in Shedeur Sanders' situation. And it requires immense talent, it requires hard work, it requires fortune. All of those things have to go right for Shedeur. It is very possible, but when we're talking about Tom Brady, it is also very unlikely.
I get it. Drew Bledsoe was also the first pick in the draft. I mean, that guy isn't in Cleveland.